Hello, and welcome to the Diverse Bookshelf with me, Samia Aziz. On this show, I interview incredible authors doing a deep dive into important themes and issues while talking all things books. On today's episode, I'm talking to the inspiring Jendella Benson. Jendella is the author of the novel Hope and Glory and is head of editorial at Black Ballad, the award-winning digital platform for Black British women. She is also the host of the podcast Black Ballad Presents, The Survival Guide. She has written for the Sunday Times Style magazine, Metro Online and Independent Voices, as well as previously been a columnist for Media Diversified, MTV UK and Christian Today. In 2017, she completed and self-published her project, Young Motherhood. It was covered in The Guardian, BuzzFeed, The Voice newspaper, on London Live and in publications across Europe, Africa, America and South America. Her short story, Kindling, was published in the Book of Birmingham and her visual work has been exhibited across the UK and internationally. Jendella is a TEDx speaker who's also appeared on BBC Radio 4's Women's Hour, as well as speaking at various universities and conferences. Hi, Jendella. Thanks so much for joining me today on the Diverse Bookshelf.
Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here.
So brilliant. So you've written this absolutely stunning novel called Hope and Glory, which I loved. And I think the thing that I loved the most about it was the fact that it was just based on this like really messy family dynamic, which I like because I see myself and my family represented in that so many ways. But please, if you can introduce Hope and Glory, tell us what it's about.
Yeah, sure. So the book starts off with Glory, who's been out in LA. She's been living her best life, if you believe her Instagram feed. But when her dad suddenly dies, she comes back to London for the funeral and to be there with her family. She decides that she's not going to go back to LA. And as she's staying to kind of, be with her family, sort stuff out, she discovers a family secret that is potentially going to blow everything up before things get better. And yeah, it's all about messy family dynamics, like love, loss, redemption, and just, I guess, coming to terms with your family in all of their flawed glory.
Absolutely. Flawed glory. I love that. I really love that. So such a lovely phrase. So what inspired the story? Like, were any of the characters based on your own experiences? Do you see yourself in any of them? Did any of your life experiences lead up to it?
Yeah, so I mean, there was a whole load of different influences that went into it. I think first of all, I started trying to write a book about someone who was going through a kind of quarter life crisis, I'd say, like that moment when you think you're meant to have everything together. You're told that you will because you've done all the things, you've been through uni, you've, even if you maybe didn't complete it, you've been there, you've done all this, and you're meant to like know what you want. And Glory doesn't know what she wants, and that's where I was when I started writing the book. So that was kind of the starting point. So you can say that Glory started from me, but as I was writing, I found myself really relating a lot more to some of the other characters. I think especially because I wrote it over the period of maybe about 3 or so years. So as I'm like growing, I'm starting to relate more to like Faith, Glory's older sister, and even to her mom Celeste in some ways. So I think I went on a bit of a journey as well as I was writing the book. But I just wanted to write a story that definitely showed the kind of like flawed messiness of a family. And I think the inspiration for certain things came from my personal life, from my friends' lives as well. So Glory's brother is in prison, and that came from an experience of having someone close to me be in prison. So I was kind of just drawing from all these different places, and I just wanted to write a story that people would read and they'd recognize, like they'd read the book and they'd be like, oh, I know this character, or I know that situation. Or if they're going through something similar where they might have a family member who's in prison, or they might be going through kind of the grieving process and the complicated grieving process that often comes with like grieving parents and older family members, as you start to perhaps understand them a little bit differently to how maybe you thought you knew them. And that's really, really, really complicated. So I just wanted to write a story that people would recognize and be able to say, okay, this feels real, or I know someone like that. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I think with the book, you've got things in there that are quite specific that certain people would be able to relate to, like, you know, people with immigrant backgrounds or immigrant parents. I think there's a lot of things that, you know, we would be able to relate to. And maybe if you're not from that background, maybe you won't relate to it as much. But then there's so much that I feel like is universal. So you began with talking about the point that Glory is in the book, where she's kind of like, you know, she's been to uni, she's traveled halfway across the world because she thinks she's going to achieve her dreams and like live her best life, but actually it's not like that. And I think that's such a universal experience when you kind of, you feel like you should be at the peak almost, and you're just not, and it looks like everyone around you is thriving and you feel like you're failing. I feel like that's such a universal experience. And there's other things as well, like grief. And you also talk about mental health and postpartum depression, which I feel like is a lot more relatable wherever you're from, you know, ethnically, or your family or whatever. So I really love that. I felt like anybody that picked it up would feel a connection to this family in some ways. So yeah, I really love that. And
I'm so happy.
And so the book is based in Peckham, South London, and I know I know you spent some time there, but you're from Birmingham, I think, originally.
Yeah, that's
so
correct.
Why did you choose Peckham? Lovely Peckham.
So I think I wrote in Peckham for a couple of reasons. First of all, when I was writing the story, I was actually living in Croydon, but I wasn't enjoying living in Croydon. I like living in Croydon now. So for anyone who's listening, not slating Croydon at all, I like it. But at the time that I was writing it, I kind of really didn't want to be there. I wanted to be back in Peckham, which is the place that I moved to. Literally the week after I turned 18, I was on a train to London and I was living in Peckham because that's where my family were based. I've still got family there right now, so it's a place I'm really familiar with, and it holds a lot of just happy memories, because I think in terms of my identity as like a British Nigerian, I grew up in Birmingham where there weren't that many, or at least all the Nigerians in Birmingham I felt like my family knew. They were all like connected to my family in some way. So
family knew all the Nigerians in Birmingham.
Yeah, so there wasn't that many Nigerians in Birmingham. So I think moving to London and moving to Peckham, which some kind of see as Little Lagos, it was a chance for me to really connect with that side of my identity and kind of being British Nigerian. And I just really loved living there. The community, the Nigerian community there is so vibrant, but obviously things are changing with gentrification and all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to write a story that would also, I guess, pay homage to that community and that place, and almost like kind of like freeze it in time for a little bit, even just for myself, like the memories and the places and the vibe of the place, because it is changing really rapidly.
Absolutely. And on that, actually, you bring that out really well in the book, this, you know, this idea of gentrification. And I think you touch on what actually you put forward, how difficult it is and how messy it is and how kind of people are really struggling with it. And I think, you know, when we think of gentrification, you know, we think of kind of like swanky new coffee shops, like, you know, indie kind of nice places like that, and like sky high buildings. But actually what gentrification brings is a loss of identity. And you kind of, I think there's a bit in the book as well where we see this kind of almost divide between old Peckham and new Peckham. So can you talk a bit about that? Because that was a big part of the book.
Yeah. So yeah, there's the scene when kind of Glory returns to Peckham and she's taken it in for the first time after being away, and she realizes how much has changed. And I think that the problem with gentrification, like everyone wants nicer things, everyone wants a nicer area to live in, but gentrification doesn't seem to take place unless the original community is pushed out or completely erased. So even in the news, there was a few years ago, there was kind of like an interview with some owners of a new yoga studio in Peckham, and they were talking about basically how they had to, I think that they had to like, they put in noise complaints or whatever for all like the African churches because they were like praising God too loud and that kind of thing. And it's like that impossibility for this new community to live side by side with the old community. I think that is what the issue is with gentrification. Because I mean, yeah, I love a Costa. Why not? Let's have a Costa. Let's have all the other signs of like a Pret, whatever. I used to work at Pret. I've got nothing against Pret, but it's once you feel like you have to erase or push out or kind of like ostracize a community in order to have your nice things. I think that's where the problem is. So yeah, Glory's kind of looking at Peckham and seeing this like divide, because it's not like, oh, everyone come together, you know, and everyone's mixing and blending, which I will say that when it comes to neighborhoods before gentrification, that is what we see, right? We see all different communities living side by side. We see them interacting. We see them serving each other, whether it's through shops or other services. That is the normality of our neighborhoods. But gentrification comes and it's just like a hammer that just smashes everything, sweeps it to the side, and it's like, okay, all of you lot are gone, and this is what the culture is going to be now. And that I don't think is fair. I think it's also a bit boring, because even when you look at somewhere like, say, Shoreditch and these places which have long been gentrified, like, I don't know, like there is no kind of like sense of unique culture. Everything kind of is a bit like copy and paste. Everything just feels a bit contrived. Like the culture feels a bit contrived, like trying to be trendy, trying to be edgy or whatever. But these natural kind of organic cultures and kind of cultural connections that take place in a neighborhood like Peckham, like, I mean, you can name neighborhoods like Peckham all over London and even outside of London and in other cities. The natural kind of way that these communities form and that these communities kind of like come together and interact, like once that's gone, it can't be replicated. It can't, or at least they're not even trying to create a space for that to happen again. So I think that's what the problem is. And then Julian, one of the characters, who's like a young Black man, he kind of talks jokingly about what it means when you have white people move into a neighborhood and now they're like racially profiling you, like you're in your neighborhood minding your business, and now they're racially profiling you and asking, you know, do you sell weed or whatever else. And that's actually based on a real story that happened that happened when I was with someone, and I was heavily pregnant at the time, which made it all the more worse for me because I was just like completely offended. Like, you think I'll be walking heavily pregnant with a drug dealer? Okay. But yeah, we were just minding our business, and some white guy came up to us and asked if the person I was with sold drugs. And I was like, wow.
Oh, gosh.
So it's like all of those things, like it's not like, that's a problem with gentrification. We all like nice things, but when you're saying that one community or certain communities don't deserve that nice stuff, there's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think what it's done, and you're so right, like it feels like it's kind of sucked the soul out of communities, and you're right, like it's happening all over London and I think all over the UK, and guessing in similar ways around the world as well. But yeah, like it sucks the soul out of a place, and you go and it all looks like pristine and they all kind of look the same and like a bit too new.
Yeah.
Gonna get that
feeling. And even like when they try, like, you know, there's that whole like hipster aesthetic with like the reclaimed wood and like the bare like brick walls, and it's and it's like but that doesn't, like, that's just a copy and paste aesthetic now. Like that's not even like anything new. It's it's terrible, really.
Because I think what it's done is it's highlighted inequalities, and it's kind of been like, well, okay, you live here but you can't afford, you don't have access to the really nice housing, you can't go and eat in that really nice restaurant because you can't afford it. And it's that kind of really shocking and horrible and divisive behavior that we're seeing, which is really, like, it's just really not on. And I thought, you could not write a book based in South London and not talk about gentrification. Like, it would just be bizarre. It wouldn't be South London, right? So
yeah, exactly.
It's so good and really important. So the book is obviously about this family, and we meet Celeste, who is the mother. And kind of as the story unfolds, we know that there's a secret that's kind of unraveling, because Glory is like chipping away, she's not letting it go, and everyone around her is actually like, look, you need to look inward, like, you're dealing with your own stuff, like, we know that something's wrong with you. But she's just like, no, I'm focused on uncovering the secret, there's something going on. But Celeste is she's a quiet character, but she's a powerful character. And I think what I really liked, what we saw with her and with the family, was just the complexity and the depth of immigrant experiences, and the sacrifices that were made. Like, I think there is, a growing understanding across the board that, those that migrated or immigrated to the UK, or were forced to do so in many cases, that they had a difficult time, that they, had faced a lot of challenges, and that they overcame so much to get to where they are now, and future generations like you and I are, experiencing the fruits of so much of what they did. But I think we don't think enough about sacrifice. But in the book, we see kind of Celeste really struggling emotionally, mentally, and it seems like as the book progresses that we just realize, because she's made sacrifice after sacrifice about things that we could never imagine that somebody would have to sacrifice, because it is so close, to her own family and her own happiness, and even like within her marriage, what she dealt with. So what was it like for you kind of exploring those things in writing? Because then I can imagine like some of that is probably linked to your own experiences and those of people around you. But what was it like for you writing that? And did you have to do a lot of research for it? What was it like?
It was really eye-opening. I would say that at first I was definitely in Glory's camp. Like, what's wrong with all you lot? Like, that was my approach. But as I'm writing these other characters and kind of like filling them out, and I'm developing an empathy for them, and I don't necessarily think it was like research, like hardcore research, but it was more just kind of delving into my own memories and experiences, and kind of trying to look at things from a completely different aspect. Because I think that sometimes when you're the child of immigrants, you can really like kind of idolize what they've done, because it's like the achievement of like leaving all your family behind, and you go and you create like a life for yourself in another country. Like, we can idolize it because it is an amazing feat to accomplish. But then we can get to a stage where we now kind of see our parents as the flawed characters they are, and now we're looking at them, we're like, actually, you did this wrong and you did that wrong, and I wouldn't do that, and and I think that was definitely my experience becoming a mum as well, like thinking, okay, well, my parents did this and I'm not going to do this, and I'm going to do better, and but it's like learning how to see your parents as fully three-dimensional humans, which means seeing the amazing things that they've done, but also seeing their flaws and being able to accept them as people, not like these characterized versions that we make up in our head of heroes or villains. And that was the journey that I was on as I was writing Celeste. And even Kunle, her husband, to a certain degree, he isn't in the book physically, but I tried to have him still in the book, because their experience, like his character and their experience as like a couple, obviously shaped Glory's childhood. They shaped the world that Glory has grown up in and what she's about to discover. So I just wanted to show that in as much kind of emotional truth as possible, because like there's just so much sacrifice. And I guess, and I would see like people talking about like, oh, you can't afford to live in London, like, it's fine, just move out. You know, our parents moved from whatever country to this country and they made it all right. So, you know, it's fine. You can just up and leave and go to another place. Like, stop, almost like stop being a baby kind of thing. And we say our parents are fine, but are they really fine? Like, what do we mean by are they fine? Because we can joke, and it's so funny, like I'll be talking to friends and we'll all like be joking about the little quirks that our mums have, and it's like, oh yeah, that's just like a Nigerian mum thing, that's just an immigrant mum thing. And then when you actually delve into it, it's like, maybe some of this is coming from trauma, you know what I mean? Maybe some of these quirks, annoying habits, or ridiculous superstitions or paranoias, like all these things that they have that we're just like, oh, that's just the immigrant like parent thing, like maybe that's actually coming from trauma of separation and kind of what they've experienced and starting again. And when I started to look at things through that lens, a lot of, say, behaviors from the older generation started to make more sense, and I just started to have more empathy for them. So I wanted to kind of write Celeste in a way that would show that. But if I'm honest, the first couple of drafts, Celeste wasn't as well like rounded. I was very much focused on Glory and her story, and you know, it's like, oh, how dare they, da, 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 da. And then I started to work on it, and in fact I remember my agent gave me feedback at one point, and she was like, Celeste is so interesting, like we need to see more of her. And then I was like, actually, yeah, you're right. And then I started thinking, okay, so who is Celeste and what has she been through and why is she the way that she is, and how can I show her empathy in ways that maybe I don't always show the actual older people in my life. So yeah, and I think a lot of people have said that they really, like, from all different kind of like immigrant backgrounds, a lot of them have said that they can really relate to Celeste as a maternal figure in that way, because I think so much of our parents, or more than we realize, has been shaped by their like experience of migrating, often alone, or at least in a very, very much reduced community, to like start all over again somewhere which is, for all intents and purposes, a hostile environment.
Absolutely. Like, and I think, I don't know if it's because like we're getting older and our parents are getting older. I feel like the understanding that's developing wasn't there when like I was a teenager anyway. Like, I speak for myself, like I remember feeling so much angst because I was just like not understanding the way that my parents were thinking or behaving, and I felt like, but you know, we're here and we're safe, and but this is the world that we're living in and this is what we have to do. And it felt like we were constantly like knocking heads. But now, because I think I've thought about it a lot, I've looked into it, I've read a lot, and I feel like the empathy is 100 times what it was when I was like 15. And it's so important because we do, as you said, we kind of idolize our parents when we're young, especially, and we believe that, but they have to be good and they have to be right and they have to be able to protect us in every way, shape, and form all the time. But actually, you know, our parents are as flawed as we are, and they have lived in circumstances that we don't know what it's like, right, to leave everything you know and come into an environment where you are a foreigner and you are treated as a second-class citizen, or not even less than, oftentimes. And you know what that must have done to their mindset and to their attitude and how safe they felt. And I think it's really hard, and it's a journey to go on, I think, to be able to look at every decision that like our parents made in the context within which it was made. It's not enough to say that this thing that they did was bad for me. You have to look at it, why they made it, when they made it, how they were feeling, what they thought it was going to do. Like, it's very complicated and it's very messy.
Yeah, it is. And it's a journey, right? It's not like, oh, let me just sit down and have a little okay, cool, I've come to it's like a constant journey of, okay, like something might just come up that reminds you of something of your childhood, and now you have to unpack that and kind of understand that a little bit. And it's definitely a journey, and it's one that I think will essentially be on for most of our life.
Definitely.
I think it's good, because I think hopefully doing that will make us just better people as well. So even where we can recognize their mistakes, hopefully they can be like lessons for us, rather than just, oh, they were terrible for doing this thing. It's like, okay, no, like, I understand why they did it. I still don't agree with it, and I'm going to choose to do life differently.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, and I hope then, like, the future generation, like, you know, like, you have children, maybe I'll have children one day, like, hopefully they will have a different experience, and we'll be able to give to them in ways that our parents couldn't give to us because the circumstances were so different. I mean, I say that, and you know, we live in worsening climates anyway, politically. God knows what's going to happen to us, but we can hope for the best.
We can hope for them. But I mean, I think I always say, I just hope that my kids have different problems. Because I feel like no matter what, your kid is going to be somewhere in 10, 15 years complaining about you to someone.
Yeah.
So I just hope that their complaints are different.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that you write about in the book. And I feel like, I mean, at least in my experience in some migrant communities, but I feel like it's probably a little bit more broader than that. There's a lot of issues that aren't spoken about, like mental health, even grief, postpartum depression. You know, we see it actually with Celeste, because she's reaching out to all these like Nigerian kind of healer type people, and she's asking for advice and prayer beads and stones and what, and you know, all these kind of blessings. And part of that, I feel, is that she's not able to talk about really what she's going through. She's not acknowledging the fact that she has been through so much, and she continues to go through so much with her son in prison. She just lost her husband. One daughter's halfway across the world. The other daughter's also got her own problems.
Yeah.
She's not able to really to deal with that. So what's your experience of how we do or don't talk about these issues? And what do you think we can do?
Yeah. So one thing that I have realized is that sometimes we say, oh, you know, our parents don't have the language, or they don't talk about it, or maybe this generation doesn't. And what I've realized is that they do it, they just don't speak about things the same way. So like you said, Celeste is consulting all of these like spiritual men to give her blessings, or to send a blessed handkerchief, or all this kind of stuff that maybe we would look at and we'll say, well, that's just really superstitious, that's just kind of crazy, that's a waste of money, they're taking advantage. But it's like that is her way of, I guess, addressing her problem. She recognizes that she has a problem and she's trying to address it in this way. It might not be the right way, and it might not be a way that you agree with, but to say that she doesn't recognize or she doesn't have the language, I think is a bit unfair. So I think it's more about learning how to speak each other's languages in that sense, like understanding where someone else is coming from and how they are talking about something, and rather than dismiss that and be like, well, you're not talking about it the right way, or you're not seeing things the right way, see that as a way in to be like, okay, so this is how you see things, let me address things from your point of view, or let me kind of come at this from this angle, and then hopefully at least we're on the same page now, and then the conversation can progress. Because I think we are getting better. I definitely think our generation is opening up the conversation more, but it's mostly these conversations that we're having amongst ourselves, like, and for the well-being of our whole communities, we need other generations to be on board as well. But I think it's definitely just finding how they approach and what they see the problem as and how they talk about it. Because another example I'll give is that when I was pregnant with my first son, my mom came and stayed with me, and she was like, oh yeah, because, you know, after I had you and your brother, I had depression and no one was there. And I was like, what? Like, you never told me this. And I've heard so many other like women talk about how they've been through things like miscarriage or postnatal depression, and you don't realize that other people in your community have gone through it until that happens to you, and then they come alongside and they say, okay, yeah, I'm gonna come alongside and help you. And similarly, my aunt came around, so there's this kind of tradition in various like Nigerian ethnic groups of people coming around for a certain amount of days post childbirth. So my aunt came around and she was like giving me these like vigorous scrub downs. She made me like certain types of soups and all this kind of stuff. And she said, yeah, because I had depression, when I had my last child in the UK, there was no one to do this for me, and I was like really depressed. And it's like understanding that, oh, okay, so that's how they talk about mental, like postnatal depression in particular, is by serving. It's not that they don't recognize it or they don't like address it. It's like, rather than maybe in Western culture, we're used to kind of like sitting down and talking about it and talking about feelings, while other cultures might be like, okay, practical, this is what we're going to do to address the problem, to come around you, but maybe we're not going to talk about feelings, or maybe we're not going to talk about in this specific way. And that's not to say that one way is better than the other. I think ultimately you want everything, right? You want the practical support, you want the talking, you want all of it, but it's just understanding that different cultures, different generations address the mental health conversation in very different ways. So as long as we can acknowledge that, it's like a starting point.
That's really interesting. And and I think and it applies to so many different things as well. Like, for example, like with grief, like I can't imagine having someone in my life lose someone close to them, and then I can't imagine just giving them space. Like what I would do is I may not sit and talk to them about their grief, but I will go and I will like cook food, and I will like if they have guests, I will tend to the guests, and I will make sure that their fridges are stocked. And it's acts of service. And I think that was one of the things actually that I struggled with so much during the pandemic, was when we were losing people and not being able to do that. And actually what you were having to do was having to call them and have a conversation that felt forced, because that's not how you express support 100%. And solidarity. And it's just it's really fast. And I think it's really important, you're right, definitely to understand that people talk about things or experience things or show support in different ways, and to respect that, acknowledge it, and come to them with on that level as well. I think it's really really good. So you did mention actually that one of your friends or somebody, you had experience of somebody being wrongfully imprisoned, and so you do write in the book about institutional and systemic racism, especially within the justice system. And we meet Victor, well, we don't meet him, but Victor's in prison for basically he shouldn't be there. What was that like? Did you have to do a lot of research for that? How did you come to bring that story about?
So it was actually my kid's dad was in prison for 4 years, and while he was there, he was telling me stories about people who were there on joint enterprise charges. So that's where so Victor's there on a joint enterprise charge, and that's where that storyline came from, because he's telling me about these like young boys who are like in prison for ridiculous amount of times for basically doing nothing but association. It's essentially guilt by association. So I did do research for that. I did, because I haven't had any direct experience of someone being imprisoned for that, on that charge. So I went and I was doing research, and I learned so much. I learned about just how it's not just a race thing, it's also a class thing as well. So it affects white working class boys, and that was a lot of research just on the kind of mechanics in that sense. And even so, the storyline that I wrote for Victor in Hope and Glory was quite that was an imagined storyline. But even just more recently, we've had stories of a group of young Black boys in I think they're either all Black or mostly Black boys, who in Manchester have been charged and convicted on a similar joint enterprise conspiracy charge for text messages that they were sent in a group chat when their friend died. So they were expressing their grief and their anger in this group chat, and somehow the police got hold of this group chat and basically was charging them with conspiracy to commit actual like violent acts, even though no violent acts were committed. And it's funny because that happened, and I thought, if I had put that story in Hope and Glory, I don't think people would have believed it. So but it's like, that is actually
it sounds so
what has happened. It sounds so far-fetched, but this is what has happened. There's been other like really high profile cases of like a group of white working class boys in Liverpool where again it was like joint association, like this is happening, and it's so easy for us to turn eyes to America and be like, oh, they're crazy over there. And it's like, no, like our justice system can be just as crazy and just as wild. So yeah, I definitely did research around just that joint enterprise and what it means and how it's applied, because I thought that it was just something that I wanted to highlight, because when I was hearing the real life stories of these like young like guys, or even just young men, like people with families who are, they've not done anything wrong, they've just been in proximity to someone who's done something wrong, or again it's like conspiracy, so the police are like, we believe that given the chance you would have done this thing, even though you didn't do it. So I mean, I'm laughing, but it's one of the ones where you laugh because otherwise you'll cry, right? Because it's absolutely mad.
Terrible. It's really, yeah, I mean, I say it's shocking, but I know that like the justice system is heavily flawed, and that especially I think men of a certain background, it's a race thing. It's even a religious thing. Like as a Muslim woman for years and years, I haven't felt safe. Haven't felt like the justice system has my back. And I have worried for the men in my life, brothers, cousins, and even my husband. Like it's really frightening. So I mean, I was really glad to see that storyline, and I felt like it was quite brought out quite well, quite subtly, but really raised some really important issues. And I hope it's given people something to think about and something to go away and look into a little bit more, because it does. Even in the book, it's like when Victor tells Glory what he went through, and you're reading it and you're just like, but you didn't do anything wrong. How have you ended up in prison for years? And the reality is, like, if he gets justice, but what's going to happen for all the years that he spent in prison, everything that he endured? Like, we can't get that time back, can't wipe away those experiences. So it's really sad. I'd like to talk a little bit about your publishing journey. So what was it like? Like, did you face any challenges? How easy or how difficult was it to get the book published? What's been your experience?
It's been a good experience. So what actually happened was, so my day job, I'm head of editorial at Black Ballad, but I was writing for Black Ballad before I came on board as an employee, and an editor actually read something that I'd written on Black Ballad and came to me and said, oh, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I was like, yeah, sure, like, doesn't everyone? So she was like, have a think about ideas, stuff that you might want to write. And I thought of this idea, Hope and Glory, and I started to develop it, but then she ended up leaving the publishing house where she was, so I didn't end up working with her because she moved somewhere else, and it was like different genres, different kind of like flavors and whatever. But in the process of me developing, I'd approached an agent, Juliet, and Juliet Pickering was my agent, and she had liked the idea, she'd liked what I'd done so far, so I was working with her. So I was just kind of, for about, I want to say about 3 years, I was just kind of like quietly on and off working away at this draft. And then it was I finished the draft probably, I want to say it was the Sunday before we went into lockdown in March. So literally I finished it on the Sunday, and then Juliet sent it out to publishers that week. It was like first week of lockdown, like, wow, interesting times. So she sent it around to loads of places, and I got a lot of no's at first, which were very deflating. It was like, what? Some of the feedback I still give that we have like serious side eyes towards some of the feedback to this day, but it's fine because they say all you need is one yes, and in the end I had 3 publishers who were interested in the story. So it went to kind of like auction, which is when they're like submitted bids and kind of like giving proposals and like basically trying to woo you. So that was fun. So I went with Trapeze, and then it was like the long wait. So I signed in 2020, and my book's not coming out till 2022. So there was more revisions. I think all in all, there's like 7 different versions of Hope and Glory. Yeah, it went through 7 full, like, start to finish revisions, I think. So yeah, that was like 2 years of revising, and then it came out and it was great, but it was quite emotional actually. I think I wasn't ready for how emotionally up and down the publication process would be, like not just before publication but afterwards. Like some days you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, I've written a book and it's out in the world, and then other times you're like, oh my gosh, do people like it? Oh, what if people hate it? Oh my, I saw this like negative comment somewhere, and oh my, like, I hate it. I hate it. And then you'll be even just little things like, oh, why hasn't such and such a person read it, and this person in my life read it, and this like all of these kind of like emotions. It is like a real wild journey, but I want to say that I have had mostly good experience. I think I've just experienced very normal kind of ups and downs. Like I haven't had anything significantly bad or significantly worse, I think, than what other authors go through. I think it is just an emotional process. It's more emotional than I thought it would be. I'd say that, yeah.
Oh, I can imagine. I can only imagine, really. Do you think there were any sort of expectations placed upon you and your book as a Black woman?
I feel expectations. I don't know. I'm not actually sure. I think that what I tried to not pay even now, I try not to pay too much attention, because I'm very thin-skinned, so like stuff that people say really gets to me. So I try not to spend too much time thinking about what other people. Doesn't mean that I'm successful all the time, because I'm not, but I try not to spend too much time. But I think that I will say that I think that some of the feedback that I did get in the submission process from editors who wouldn't take the book, I think, like, oh, it's not relatable, the characters, and these, because it's like mostly white middle class women who are saying that they can't relate to this story that is very much not white middle class England in that sense. And I think that in some ways that has played out, but I don't want to say completely, because I've had amazing feedback from so many people from so many different backgrounds. But I will say that when I did lose my sense of direction for a little bit, and I went looking on Goodreads to see what people were saying, like there was a lot of like white ladies from like middle America who just didn't get it. And I was like, well, of course you didn't get it, because you don't really know what London's like. You don't really know what our experience in the UK is like, and you're not trying to learn, basically. So yeah, I don't even know if I'm really answering your question well, but I just think that, okay, I'll try and sum it up by saying I think that sometimes as Black writers, as writers from marginalized backgrounds, whether you're Black, Asian, I don't know, working class, queer, whatever, I think that there's a certain expectation that you make your world accessible to, it's not even the masses, but to like the white middle class assumed reader. Yes. I think there's an expectation that you should make it accessible to them, and you're like holding their hand and taking them through. And there's been a lot of conversation about this on Twitter recently, about who do Black writers write for? Like, are we writing for a white audience to like give them a window into our world, or are we just writing for ourselves and our people? And I definitely wrote Hope and Glory thinking, I'm writing this for myself, for people like me, and for anyone who's not like me but just likes a good story. Like, that is who I'm writing for. And I can see how that then plays out when you have people who are so used to being pandered to, and they're reading a book and they're like, this is not relatable, or this is not, or I didn't like this and I didn't like this about that. And it's like, I mean, that's fine. I read loads of books that I don't enjoy, and I just think, oh, this book wasn't for me. It's fine. Yeah. But for some people, they find it so offensive that you haven't like I don't know, like rolled out the red carpet for them and their perspective and their ego. So that is a really long way of answering the question. But I think, yeah, I try not to pay too much attention to what people are thinking, but I think there are still some readers who expect quote unquote marginalized voices to like handhold them through books, or to write books in a way that is like, oh, this was so eye-opening and I learned so much and you educated me so much on racism, and it's like you've had a whole 2 years of books written for white people about racism and discrimination and all that kind of stuff. This book is not that book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I feel like it's actually a growing issue because I mean, I've read reviews of books where people have been like, oh, I couldn't relate to it because like I didn't understand this element of their culture, or I didn't understand this like brown family. I didn't understand the dynamics, and I didn't understand the religious aspect or whatever it is. And it's like, okay, like you don't find it familiar because it's not your experience, but if you don't know something, like this book should only begin your kind of like you know desire to find out more. And like we shouldn't turn to authors to provide all the answers and to provide knowledge, especially when they're writing fiction, because they're telling a story. It's a story. And I find it increasingly frustrating. And I think there's an expectation with some readers that authors in their books should provide a translation if they're writing phrases or whatever in a different language, or that's pertaining to a particular religious festival or whatever. But no, like why should they have to? Like if you want to know what it is,
footnotes.
Exactly. If you want to know
like,
what it is, Google it, right? Like
you Google it. It's like they want a cultural safari, and it's like, no, this isn't a safari. Like, we are letting you into this world if you're interested, but no one's gonna censor you in it. And it's funny because we can read Shakespeare and not know anything about the culture, and in order to read Shakespeare, you have to do a lot of understanding context, understanding language, understanding this, understanding that. And then everyone does all that, read Shakespeare, it's like, oh, he's a genius. And it's like, but for other writers who are just writing about something that you're unfamiliar with, the fact that you don't know isn't an opportunity for you to learn, but it's suddenly an opportunity to say, oh, well, that writer didn't do this very good, or oh, I didn't, or this book wasn't very good. And it's just very like narcissistic and kind of like weirdly just like making something about you that is clearly like not about you at all. Because it's like, I love reading books and learning about other cultures and other time periods, and I always say when it comes to history, the easiest way to get me to understand something historical is put it in a novel and I'll read it and I'll enjoy it and I'll learn something along the way. But because I'm not just gonna sit and read a like factual history book, like even like historical documentaries, I'm not that interested. But put it in a book and I'll read and I'll learn. And I mean, reading a book is actually one of the most immersive ways of learning about someone else and their world and another culture. But yeah, I think certain demographics are too used to being pandered and centered in that way. And it's very it's a bit draining, but then that's why I don't read Goodreads comments.
I don't. I mean, I would stay away if I was you, because you don't want to read those 1-star reviews. They don't most of them, because I think it's completely fine. You don't vibe with the book, you don't vibe with the book. Like, I don't love every book that I read, and that's fine. And you can say that you didn't like X, Y, and Z thing about it, but if you didn't like it because it's not like English enough for you, or like anglicized enough for you, like that's a different issue, and that's a problem. And I'm seeing increasingly more authors that are kind of taking this approach, and I absolutely love it. And some of them talk about it in terms of like decolonizing literature. Like, why do we need to change Vietnamese names or Nigerian names or Pakistani names? Why do we need to change them into something that is more palatable to the English speaker? Like, we shouldn't have to do it. We're going to keep our names. We're going to keep them in the language within which they were written. With, you know, if there's like marks or indents or whatever it is in the language, we're going to keep those because those are our names. And I absolutely love it. I think it's so important. Yeah, and I'm really glad that we're seeing more of that now.
Yeah, but because it's definitely a hierarchy of cultures in some people's minds, because there are other cultures where, you know, it's perfectly acceptable to have a French character called Matthew instead of Matthew, or what, but like, God forbid you don't anglicize like someone's Urdu name, and it's like, well, I don't like this book because I can't pronounce it. It's like, oh my gosh, get a life. Or just don't, like, no one's forcing you to read the book. No one's actually forcing you to read it. So
like, if it's not for you, like, just put it aside. You don't
just put it aside, pick up something else.
Exactly. Did you always want to be a writer?
I did. The very first thing that I ever wanted to do was write books, and that was because I was reading books written for white children, like The Secret Garden and Famous Five and The Railway Children, and I wanted to write books that I enjoyed reading them. I did. The Secret Garden, I'll say, is definitely probably my favorite childhood book, but I wanted to read books that had people that looked like me in it. And I think that's when I wanted to write. And then I fell off review. Well, the truth is, I tried to write a book. It didn't go very well. And I was probably like 7 or 10 or something. And I was like, yeah, maybe this novel writing isn't for me. I'll give it up. So I kind of stopped for a while.
You were 10 years old?
Yeah, I know, it's ridiculous. I threw in the towel at 10 and I was like, clearly this is not made for me. But yeah, and thankfully I came back to it. But the very first thing I ever wanted to do was write books.
That's so nice. And so you said that The Secret Garden was one of your like favorite books. What else inspired you as a child and growing up?
So yeah, like The Secret Garden, I just love that book so much. Again, that idea of like secrets and like, in fact, maybe there are some like strange parallels, like family secrets and hidden information and all that kind of stuff. Maybe there are some strange parallels between The Secret Garden and Hope and Glory, but I loved The Secret Garden. I loved The Railway Children. And I just love these books where kids were just on their own adventures. Like, even, I mean, Enid Blyton, like, now I guess I'm realizing how racist apparently she was. To be fair, all of them, even The Secret Garden was like really problematic. Like, it was incredibly,
because it starts off in India, right?
Yes,
like, the British Raj.
Yes, it started, like, looking back, it was incredibly problematic. But I just love these spaces where kids kind of got to have their own like adventures. And I just love shows. I love like Rugrats, you know, like the kids running around in their like imaginary world. And even stuff like Hey Arnold, the cartoon, where it's like you've got these kids in, I guess it's New York, and they're going on these crazy adventures, like encountering all of these things that if their parents knew what they were doing, like what on earth. But I just love that like freedom to roam, I think. And I really liked that even like in my childhood. I think maybe that's something that I perhaps feel a bit sad about now, is that not really having the space or the freedom to roam. So when I was growing up, we lived right next to this massive country park. So in the summer we would just go, it's like acres and acres of like land in Birmingham. We would just go, it's called Woodgate Valley, and we'd just go and we'd be doing brook jumping and we'd be climbing trees and we'd be doing like all of this kind of stuff. And I feel a bit sad because I'm raising like city boys now who I have to like actively think, let's go find some grass. But yeah, I just love that freedom to roam and that freedom to like have adventures and like make dens and all of that kind of stuff. And I think that just already fed my imagination.
That's so lovely. And so what now, like, who are your sort of go-to authors? What books really inspire you now?
Oh my gosh, my go-to authors. I get inspired by so much that I read, but I guess I have like a personal canon where like these are the authors who, without fail, I will read and I will enjoy, but I'll also be like really challenged just in terms of like my own level of writing. And Toni Morrison is one. Tsitsi Dangarengba is another. Jamaica Kincaid and Toni Cade Bambara. So those are like kind of like my four Black women writers who write in like their prose is just beautiful, like beautiful imagery, beautiful kind of just sentences, like word combinations, beautiful. But also what I really love about their work is just how they infuse like politics, but I'm gonna say with a small p, because it's not like the kind of politics as we know it, like the machinery of politics, but just like, yeah, just like the politics of being Black during a certain time, or being a woman during a certain time. Like for example, Jamaica Kincaid, like Annie, John and Lucy, like being a young Black girl, like Black girlhood, like what does that mean in a world that is always trying to constrain girls and kind of like keep them in. So you have these like really strong, like precocious kind of characters. Like I love that with Tsitsi Dangarengba's work, like colonialism and Zimbabwe. What does it mean to be a woman in colonial, post-colonial Zimbabwe? And like Toni Cade Bambara, like what does it mean to be a Black woman, like post-civil rights? Like all of these like massive ideas, but then they're condensed into these beautiful, like lyrical, immersive stories. And that is what I just want to do. Like I would say that those are probably quote unquote literary writers, and I probably wouldn't be classed as a literary writer, whatever that means. But just that idea of taking these big ideas about what's it mean to be human in the specificities of your race or your region or whatever your background, and into these like condense them down into these like beautiful stories. Even as I'm talking about them, I feel like I'm just losing words because it's like I just love their work. So those are the writers that I always come back to. But to be fair, there's just so many other great books that are being written. Like I don't have enough shelf space, I don't have enough time, but I will read them all.
Yes, absolutely. I loved what you just said, and actually that kind of the way you were kind of losing your words, whenever I put down a Toni Morrison, I feel like I can't speak because I'm just kind of like I've been so immersed in, and her books are usually quite small as well. But I've like been so immersed, and I feel so heavy, and it's just so, and I always learn so much. Even though her books don't tend to span like a huge amount of time, they tend to be really specific, but they're so
really
stunning.
specific, really intimate kind of stories, but so like wide in their scope. And literally, like you said, like I'll read a sentence and I'll just be like, whew. And I'll just need like a moment to like process this one sentence that she's written. And that's that's the bar that I'm aiming for. We'll see if I get there. That's where we're going.
Hopefully. Are you still writing now?
So I've actually completed the first draft or second draft of my second novel. So
exciting.
a bit more work to do. Hopefully not 7 more drafts, but there's still work to do.
Are you allowed to tell a little bit what it's about?
Yes, I mean it's a bit different to Hope and Glory in a sense where, so it's actually two main characters this time, and one of them is like a young mom. She's had a baby as a teenager, and she's kind of estranged from her family because of this decision that she's made around having a baby. She's not with the dad, so she's like a young single mom. And then her neighbor is a young kind of like 15-year-old who's like a latchkey kid, so like her mom is always at work. And it's kind of about them meeting and how they find each other across a really like crazy summer where there's like a lot of stuff happening. But it's a little bit darker than Hope and Glory. I will say that it's a little bit darker. It's a bit sadder in certain places, but I have aimed for a happy ending, as I always try to do. So yeah,
that's so lovely. And I feel like that happy ending is a great place for us to wrap up today. It's been, honestly, It's been so lovely speaking to you. And I mean, we could, I'm sure, carry on talking.
I know.
It's been so lovely. Thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it.
I don't know about you, but I absolutely loved that conversation with Jendella. Thank you so much, Jendella, for your time and such an inspiring conversation. If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow the Diverse Bookshelf on your podcast platform of choice, and I would really appreciate it if you could rate and review. It helps more people find the podcast.